I came home after 14 hours of work smelling like motor oil, sawdust, and bad decisions, and found half my front lawn buried under fresh oak branches, with an HOA citation tucked under my windshield wiper like a tip after a bad meal. No call, no warning, no knock on the door, just a pile of my grandfather's tree on the grass and a note telling me I was somehow the problem. That was the moment I realized Beverly Mitch hadn't just crossed a line. She'd fired up a chainsaw and cut straight through it. When I looked down the street there, she was standing in her doorway like she'd been waiting for me to notice. Smiling. Pressed blouse, perfect hair, that practiced little county office smile that says, "I already decided I'm right." She actually told me she'd done me a favor. Said the tree was an eyesore, said it was hurting property values, said I ought to be thanking her. I didn't yell, didn't cuss, didn't give her the satisfaction. I just nodded, went inside, washed my hands, and started planning how to make that little favor become the most expensive mistake her HOA ever made. Darlene, my wife, says I get quiet when I'm angry, and she's right. Some men throw punches, some men throw words. I read documents. We'd moved into Clover Ridge Estates outside Knoxville in the fall of 2019, and we loved it for the exact reasons people don't usually brag about. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't one of those sterile, over-manicured neighborhoods where every porch looks staged for resale photos. It had real trees, big lots, old fences, people who waved from driveways, people who brought casseroles when somebody got sick. It felt lived in. That mattered to us. The best part of our place was the giant red oak in the front yard, a real old bruiser of a tree, tall as a church steeple, thick trunk, deep canopy, the kind of tree that makes a house feel permanent. I'm a carpenter, so I noticed structure, and that oak was solid, healthy, balanced, beautiful, the kind of tree you build memories under, the kind of tree you don't replace because somebody with a title and too much free time decides she doesn't like the shadow it casts. For years, the HOA had been mostly harmless. One of those sleepy neighborhood organizations that collected dues, patched potholes, and occasionally reminded people not to leave a boat in the driveway too long. Then Beverly got elected president in 2021 unopposed, of course, because nobody sane ever wants that job. And like it always goes with people who mistake authority for identity, she took that little title and treated it like a crown. First came the handbook, 12 pages of updated standards for a neighborhood with 43 houses, mailbox colors, decoration guidelines, visual harmony, even a paragraph about wind chimes. Wind chimes. I should have seen the storm coming right there, but I figured she'd get tired, same as every other petty tyrant who discovers Robert's Rules of Order in a printer. I was wrong. The first time she had my tree cut, I tried the civilized route. I walked to her house, knocked on her door, and asked for one simple thing. Next time, notify me before sending a crew onto my property. She gave me that syrupy, bureaucratic answer, said she'd take it under advisement, which is polite lady language for go to hell. Then she handed me highlighted HOA language about nuisance abatement vague enough to drive a bulldozer through. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, Darlene across from me, watching some cooking show, and I read the entire CC&R packet line by line, 47 pages of legal oatmeal. Most people never read those documents until they're already in trouble. I did. Took notes on a yellow legal pad, marked clauses, flagged contradictions. Not because I had a grand strategy yet, just because something in my gut told me Beverly was the kind of person who counted on everybody else staying lazy. Then summer hit and Beverly got bolder. A loose fence board after a storm turned into a formal violation letter. Dale Prescott got cited over a basketball hoop his grandkids used on weekends. Wanda Forsythe got hassled over neat little raised garden beds that looked better than half the flower beds in the neighborhood. Bart Schilling got told his old work truck was lowering curb appeal, which was rich coming from a woman whose shutters didn't even function. Bit by bit, mailbox by mailbox, you could feel the mood in Clover Ridge changing. People were still polite, still waving, still mowing their grass. But now the conversations lasted longer. The air had that pressure drop feeling right before thunder. Then Beverly came back for my tree. One Friday I got home and found a bright orange hanger from Boyd & Sons, the same landscaping crew as before. Only this time they hadn't just trimmed a limb hanging over the sidewalk. They'd taken off a major lower branch 8 inches thick at the base, and they'd cut it wrong too close to the collar. The kind of bad cut that invites disease into a healthy tree. I stood there staring at that wound and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage exactly. Clarity. I called the crew. The young guy who answered sounded embarrassed the second he realized what he'd stepped into. Said they had a signed HOA work order and thought authorization was legitimate. Maybe he believed that. I didn't blame him. I blamed the woman who signed the paper. The next morning, I brought in a certified arborist named Philip Draper. Philip walked the property, studied the cut, took measurements, tapped bark, made notes, and then gave me the report I needed. The damage had reduced the tree's structural integrity, created a real risk of fungal intrusion, and carried an appraised loss in arboricultural value of $2,800. Best $350 I ever spent. That report went into a folder I labeled Exhibit B. Exhibit A was the earlier memo Beverly had used to justify the first tree trimming. A one-signature internal authorization with no real board vote behind it. That mattered because the more I dug, the more I realized Beverly wasn't running the HOA like a board. She was running it like a personal kingdom. So I started talking to people. Quietly. Not stirring the pot, just asking questions, taking notes, listening. And what I found was worse than I expected. At least 6 households had gotten citations in just a few months. Several had paid fines without ever knowing whether those fines had been lawfully approved. The so-called fine schedule Beverly was using hadn't even been formally adopted by the board. That's when the first twist showed up. The board had another member, a younger guy named Corbin, who'd been traveling a lot for work. I called him on a Sunday afternoon, sent him copies of what Beverly had been issuing, and the man nearly came through the phone. He hadn't approved the fines, hadn't approved the landscaping work, hadn't even seen the handbook Beverly kept waving around like Moses with stone tablets. Suddenly, this wasn't me versus Beverly. Now it was a pattern. Corbin started pulling records, bank statements, meeting notes, invoices, and once the money trail came into view, the whole thing got uglier fast. Over 4 months, more than $2,000 in fines had gone into the HOA operating account with no clean documentation. Boyd & Sons had been paid $4,400 for common area vegetation management, except some of that common area was my front yard, and possibly other people's private lots too. Then came the real bombshell. One night, Corbin found an archived copy of the original founding HOA documents. Not the cherry-picked pages Beverly kept quoting, but the full original set going back to 1991. Buried deep in the back was Section 11.4, and Section 11.4 changed everything. It said any board action affecting landscaping on a private lot required 2 things: written consent from the homeowner and approval by at least 2/3 of the board. Not one or the other. Both. Beverly hadn't bent the rules. She'd bulldozed right over them. And because God apparently has a taste for dramatic timing, the next day, Wanda turned out to have a law degree. She'd left legal practice years ago for social work, but she still knew how to read a statute like it owed her money. She pulled Tennessee HOA law, highlighted the relevant sections, and confirmed what we were all starting to suspect. Beverly had no lawful basis for those fees, those trims, or that made-up tree policy she was trying to roll out. Then Wanda found one more thing. Boyd & Sons, the contractor Beverly kept hiring, was owned by Stuart Boyd, Beverly's brother-in-law. That was the moment the room changed. What had looked like overreach suddenly smelled like self-dealing. Not just control, not just ego. Money. Family money, HOA money, private property, selective enforcement, conflict of interest, the whole rotten sandwich. So we got organized. 11 households met at my house one Saturday morning. Darlene made coffee, set out donuts, and while the room smelled like sugar and nerves, I laid everything out on the coffee table. The memos, the arborist report, the invoices, the statutes, the citations, the records, requests, all of it. People who'd thought they were dealing with isolated annoyances suddenly saw the pattern in full color. Same hand, same tactics, same woman. We hired an HOA attorney named Patricia, a no-nonsense woman who talked like a person billing by the quarter hour because she was. She told us to stop reacting emotionally and start building the record. No grandstanding, no social media war, no warning shots, just documentation timing and one clean public reckoning Beverly wouldn't be able to spin afterward. So that's what we did. We filed formal records requests. We forced a special membership meeting. We documented every improper notice, every fine, every procedural shortcut. Beverly panicked exactly the way guilty people do. She sent community emails calling us agitators. She tried to retroactively approve her own actions in a rushed board meeting with her favorite rubber stamp sitting beside her. She even went to Dale's house and hinted that maybe his citation problems could disappear if he backed off. Dale, God bless him, looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm going to need that in writing." She did not put it in writing. By late December, even Phyllis Beverly's quiet ally on the board started backing away. Turns out she hadn't known about the brother-in-law connection either. Hadn't known about Section 11.4. Hadn't known she was helping sign off on a legal grenade. She gave a written statement. Just like that, Beverly was standing on thinner ice than she realized. We scheduled the special meeting for a Saturday morning in January. The week before it, Beverly dropped a 4-page truth report into every mailbox in the neighborhood, polished and smug and selective as hell. In her version, my tree was dangerous, the contractor was trustworthy, the fees were legitimate, and I was just some bitter guy with an axe to grind. We didn't answer, didn't argue, didn't post. We let her talk. Saturday came cold and bright. Before sunrise, I stood under that scarred red oak with a cup of coffee and put my hand on the bark. Rough, cold, steady. Trees don't panic. They don't scheme. They just keep standing there while foolish people make short-term decisions around them. There was something calming about that. By 9:55, my living room was full. 31 homeowners out of 43. Folding chairs in rows. Printed packets on every seat. Patricia on video call, Corbin at the front, Phyllis in the corner looking like she'd aged a decade since Christmas, a reporter from the Knoxville Sentinel in the back with a notebook open, and then Beverly walked in, saw the room, and stopped dead in the doorway. That look on her face, I'd pay money to see it again. She'd expected a fight. What she walked into was a proceeding. Corbin opened the meeting. I walked through the packet page by page, calm as Sunday lumber inventory. Section 11.4, the one signature memo, the arborist's report, the financial records, the Secretary of State business registration linking Boyd and Sons to Beverly's family. Then Wanda stood up and laid out the law so clearly you could have framed it. Breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized assessments, recovery rights, disclosure consequences for property values. You could hear the room shifting. Not loud, just that soft collective inhale people make when denial finally runs out of road. Beverly tried to interrupt twice. Corbin shut her down both times by pointing to the agenda she hadn't written. That was the part I enjoyed most. She was trapped inside rules for once. Real rules, not the homemade kind she printed on letterhead. Then the reporter asked her the question that finished it. He looked at Beverly and asked why HOA financial records listed payments to Boyd and Sons for common area vegetation work when the work orders referenced private residential addresses. No accusation, no theatrics, just accuracy. And accuracy was enough. Silence hit that room so hard it felt physical. Beverly opened her mouth, tried to talk around it, said the boundary between private and common areas wasn't always clear. The reporter looked back at the paperwork and said the addresses seemed pretty clear. That was it. That was the sound of the floor giving way. The vote took 11 minutes. 30-1. Her own neighborhood suspended the board's authority, rescinded the improperly issued fines, ordered a forensic audit, and set a new election. 4 days later, the Sentinel ran the story. Not gossip, not rumor. Names, facts, documents. Boyd and Sons lost the HOA contract, then lost others. Beverly resigned in February. By spring, her house was on the market. The audit found $3,140 in improperly collected fines. Homeowners got refunded. I filed a small claims case and recovered the $2,800 in tree damage for $87 and a few months of patience. No dramatic courtroom speech, no expensive legal circus, just a folder, a filing fee, and a judge who could read. The red oak survived. Leafed out beautifully that spring, maybe fuller than before, like it took the insult personally and decided to answer with growth. Corbin became HOA president and ran the place with actual transparency. Phyllis stayed on and turned out to be pretty great once she stopped following the wrong person. Wanda still grows tomatoes. Dale's grandkids still shoot hoops. Bart still keeps his truck. And one of my favorite details, the new board used leftover recovered funds to create a neighborhood canopy fund. They planted new trees in common areas and in yards of homeowners who wanted native trees but couldn't afford them. One young white oak went in by the entrance to Clover Ridge. Tiny thing now. In 30 years, somebody will probably brag about living on the street with that beautiful old tree. Funny how that works. What hit me hardest in all this wasn't even the money. It was how small the first step turned out to be. $87 to file a claim. One old clause buried in a document nobody had read in 30 years. One legal pad, one folder, one quiet decision not to stay isolated. That's the lesson I didn't fully understand until the end. Petty power survives on exhaustion, confusion, and silence. The moment ordinary people compare notes, read the fine print, and stand in the same room together, a whole lot of fake authority starts looking real fragile. So here's what I want to ask you. When somebody in power breaks the rules while hiding behind the rules is fighting back justice, or is it just a cleaner kind of revenge? Drop your HOA story in the comments. Tell me where you're from and tell me who was right here. Me, Beverly, or the neighborhood. And if you've ever dealt with a bully in a blazer, share your story too, because chances are somebody else needs to hear they're not crazy and they're definitely not alone.